Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this presentation we're going to be continuing our video series on the hypertrophy training guidelines, and this one is going to be on the biceps. So first we need to start with the anatomy of the biceps in order to get an understanding of how we can best train them. So first, if we have a look at the attachment point here at the forearm, so it attaches here on the radius, the bone of the forearm, and then it basically splits into two heads. And this is not that significant since both heads attach up here crossing the shoulder joint. So they both attach up here on the scapula, which means that they act on both the elbow joint and on the shoulder joint. So the movements we get when the biceps contracts are, as we all know, elbow flexion, and that's the primary function. So if we just have our arm here, our elbow out straight, and then we bend our elbow to close that angle up, that is elbow flexion. It also does shoulder flexion, which is because of that attachment crossing the shoulder joint. So if we have our arm out straight and then we lift our arm out, bending that shoulder joint, the biceps also contribute to that movement. And the other primary movement that the biceps produce are elbow supination. So supination is basically where if we have our palm facing down and then we turn to have our palm facing up, that's supinating our forearm or our elbow joint. So the biceps actually contribute to that movement as well. So while elbow flexion is the main movement of the biceps brachii, it also contributes to shoulder flexion and elbow supination. So a common question here is, do rows train the biceps? So any row variation, does that actually use the biceps in that movement? And you would think so, just because it has, pretty much all rowing has an element of elbow flexion to it. However, if we take a little bit of a deeper look into the anatomy of the biceps, we might see otherwise. So as we recall from the anatomy slide previously, the biceps both flex the elbow, but they also flex the shoulder. When we do a row, we have both elbow flexion, which is one movement of the biceps, but we also have shoulder extension. So if we look here, starting in this position here, and then he rows the weight towards his torso, the elbow bends, so it produces elbow flexion. But if we have a look at the shoulder here, it goes from a flexed position to an extended position. So we actually have shoulder extension. And this is an issue because the biceps, as we recall from the previous slide, flex the shoulder, not extend the shoulder. So when we perform a row, the biceps are shortening at one end, so at the elbow they're shortening, but they're lengthening at the shoulder. So at the other end, they're actually getting longer. So what happens to the biceps is that they don't really change length at all, which means that they're not really contributing to the movement much, since the nervous system wouldn't recruit the biceps, because if the biceps were to contract, it would mean that the shoulder would flex. So the biceps are probably not very active during rows. They may be more or less active at specific points of the row, or the pull down or the pull up. However, overall, there's probably not too much activation of the biceps muscles, or certainly not as much as a pure bicep curl. So that leads us on to what exercises do train the biceps well. We have bicep curls. That's the main exercise that we're going to do for the biceps. So bicep curls can be done in a variety of ways: barbell, dumbbell, cable, preacher curls, any sort of standing or seated variation. And I've got here a few bolded bicep curl variations because I think they're the most effective. So something like a dumbbell curl, especially dumbbell on an inclined seat, is probably going to be one of the best bicep exercises, since it allows us to do all the movements that the biceps produce. So if we have a look here on this image, this person lying on the bench, and the bench is on an incline, and what that does is it allows the arm to hang down, which actually has the shoulder in an extended position. So in this position here, we have the elbow extended and the shoulder extended, which means the bicep is pretty much at full stretch. We also have here the dumbbell in a neutral position. We're not in a supinated position, so the biceps are, again, even more at length. And then if we do a bicep curl from here, bringing the weight all the way up, we have a big range of motion of the biceps, because as we can see here, we get shoulder flexion. So from this point here, we can see the arm is flexed more. We also have elbow flexion, and we also have supination of the elbow joint. So we can see that dumbbell, it was neutral and now it's twisted in. So for that reason, I think an exercise like this is going to be one of the most beneficial for the biceps. We can do a similar thing with a cable. Unfortunately, I don't have an image here. If you can set up a cable with the shoulders in an extended position and the grip in a neutral position that you can make to a supinated position, you can get a similar or even better effect with a cable. So all of these exercise variations will work, and the difference between one or the other is minute details that are probably not necessary to stress about. But there are some key principles that we want to follow for all of the bicep curl exercises. So we want to make sure that the shoulders don't go into extension during the curl. So I've got here a stick figure diagram. So if we start in this bottom position with a standing barbell or dumbbell curl, for example, what we don't want to do is curl the weight up while pushing our elbow backwards. That's going to put our shoulder into extension here while we're flexing the elbow. And the issue there is the same as why the rows don't train the biceps very well. It's because we get a lengthening of the biceps at the shoulder and a contraction of the elbow, which means they're not going to be very well activated. So an easy way to fix this is to use a bench. So something like a preacher curl fixes that upper arm on a bench so it can't move back at all. So by putting a bench or a preacher curl or some sort of stop for this upper arm to go backwards, we can make sure that the shoulder doesn't go into extension during the curl. With these exercises, there is, however, a trade-off between some of them. So for example, something like a standing barbell curl, you'll be able to use more load, although the range of motion will be less. So something like a cable curl or a dumbbell curl on a incline seated position is going to allow you to get that full range of motion and full activation of the biceps through all its movements. However, the loads you're going to be able to use on the biceps are going to be slightly less. So there will be a trade-off with some of these. So how are we going to program for the biceps? An example here is that we might do on Monday standing barbell curls, and then on another day incline seated dumbbell curls. So this one's going to be, we're going to be able to use slightly more load, and we're going to do slightly lower reps, and this one we're going to be able to get more range of motion, but we're going to be able to do slightly more reps and slightly less weight. So we might do those two exercises 2 times per week on Monday and on Friday to give ourselves a good break. This might be on the same day as we do our pulling exercises or our rows. And we're going to undulate the load and the volume. So on this day, we might have higher reps and slightly lower loads to hit the biceps in a slightly different way. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.